what's up, guys? It's Sam Shaw here from Wall Street Mastermind, back here today with another client interview for you guys. This time with my client Shawn, and Shawn, is here to kind of talk to you guys about the summer internship recruiting process that he just went through. And obviously, he had a successful outcome, which we were very happy about. And so, just wanted him to come on here and share with you guys so that you guys can benefit from his experience as well. So, Shawn, thank you for taking the time to talk to everyone.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this, Sam. So, just to introduce myself, I'm Shawn Amirthan. I'm a third year at Columbia, a rising junior now, I guess. And I'm doing financial engineering at the School of Engineering here. And I'm originally from Bahrain, lived there all my life, and then decided to come to the States for undergraduate studies. Um, Columbia's been great. Initially, I came in wanting to do applied math, but then switched to financial engineering after I realized that I wanted to get into the financial services industry. Um, what else? So, like activities I'm involved in on campus are I'm involved in the student-run hedge fund at Columbia. I'm also involved on the Formula One for universities team, and I'm also involved in Greek life over here.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Cool. So, how like take us back to kind of like the beginning of your recruiting process. So, you actually worked with you actually joined Wall Street Mastermind, I guess a year ago. It was like April of last year, right?
Mhm.
But prior to that, like what was kind of the situation for you? Because like you had probably been recruiting on your own and things like that. What were some of the challenges that you were having at the time?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the challenges and one of the things that really prompted me to try and get additional help was the fact that I was sort of just struggling to get my foot through the door and wasn't approaching networking in the right way, wasn't being proactive enough, wasn't sure about how to ask someone because you can't just, you know, straight up ask someone, how do you network? And because there isn't a clear cut answer for that.
Right.
But that's the issue. Like I did try asking sort of older friends of mine who had gone through the process, but it's tough because a lot of people that have gone through the process aren't as clear or explicit about it, and it's tough to sort of gauge that information from people.
Mhm.
So that's sort of what prompted me to first approach you and ask you about what are some sort of concrete steps that one can take because at the end of the day, it's if you're sort of proactive and actually take concrete steps with regards to like reaching out to people that you're actually able to see results from it. So I think that was one of the biggest benefits. Another one was just sort of improving the behavioral side of interviewing. Um, because obviously, like you emphasized, and this is something that I didn't know prior to joining the program, but it plays a much larger role than most people think, just because pretty much everyone can nail technicals because you just study for it and you can pretty much nail it. Everyone reads the same guides, everyone reads pretty much access to like the same information,
Right.
but you know, getting across the behavioral side is a lot harder, and I think that's another aspect that really helped out.
Got it. Okay. And I guess on top of all that, you already mentioned before, but you're from Bahrain. You came here from college, so you're an international student, which actually makes it a lot harder for you as well, right?
Yeah, and that was another big deal as well. Like the fact that I didn't have a lot of friends that were international students that had gone through the process, so I wasn't, and because it does look pretty different, as you said, for international students compared to domestic students, and sort of factoring that into where I applied and like how I applied and how I sort of reached out to people was also important.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing there is what just that a lot of these firms don't sponsor visas, and so it kind of reduces I guess, the pool of opportunity that you can go after. Is that the main thing, or?
Yeah, that's one aspect of it. Just and that's a pretty important point that you raised. Just the fact that, you know, a lot of times you'd waste time reaching out to firms that might not sponsor, and if you're on top of that before you actually do it. And that's something that I did quite a bit prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind. I sort of misallocated my time, didn't focus a lot on the banks that I should have, and that's not productive for anyone, because if they're not looking to recruit internationals, then like why do I spend time on them? And if it's a waste of my time, why would I allocate so much resources to that?
Right.
Um, so that was also something that really helped as well, just honing in on which banks actually do sponsor visas, what the long-term prospects look like for a lot of these banks, reaching out to people that were international students at these banks and seeing what the process looked like for them, and how lenient they are with sponsoring internationals as well.
So, in your experience, because I'm sure we have a lot of listeners who are also international students as well, but in your experience, what are some of the banks that do sponsor versus don't sponsor? And understanding that this stuff can change from year to year, right? Because maybe they sponsor now, but next year they might not feel like it or whatever. But when you were going through it, what were some of the banks that you kind of targeted?
Sure, yeah. So it really is a mixed bag, as you said, like and sort of going to firm-wide events and talking to HR and figuring it out is sort of a big aspect of it. But I guess a general sort of rule of thumb is a lot of the European bulge brackets and a lot of the European banks tend to be pretty lenient with sponsorships, just because there's a lot of fluidity between like the New York offices and their Europe offices. So they're pretty good with sponsoring. So that's banks like Deutsche, Barclays, UBS,
Swiss,
Swiss. Yeah,
US.
exactly. Like they're pretty lenient with sponsorship, and they're pretty good at it. In terms of American banks, I think a lot of the top bulge brackets are also pretty good with sponsorship, just because it's not that big a line item for them to and like sponsor internationals, so it doesn't really affect them in the most. But where it gets sort of tricky is with a lot of the boutiques. The boutiques all have like a varying amount of policies when it comes to sponsorship and taking on international students as summer analysts. So and it varies really, like amongst like elite boutiques and boutiques, like it really does depend. And I think from what I remember, I think like Evercore is pretty good with sponsorship. PJT is kind of on the fence. I think they're a bit more conservative when it comes to giving out offers to internationals. I think Houlihan is also very conservative when it comes to sponsorship. Jeffries, I don't think sponsors, period. But yeah, it really does vary.
Got it. So you bring up another interesting point there as well, which is like some of the banks, even if they do sponsor, they're going to be very selective about who they sponsor. So it's almost like it's as if the bar in banking wasn't high enough already, but now as an international student, the bar for you is even higher, because if you're only just as good as the guy who's a U.S. citizen or whatever, it's easier for them to just hire the U.S. citizen because they don't have to go through all this trouble of sponsoring you, right? Like both the time and effort and money that they have to spend on doing that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And like you said, that is largely why they're a lot more conservative with handing out offers to internationals, just because it isn't worth their effort. And for smaller banks, like it is a bigger line item for them as well,
Yeah,
and they don't have the same resources that like bigger banks do, so they are a lot more selective.
yeah, got it. Okay, um, and then so obviously the bar is higher for you. It's almost like you're fighting with your one hand tied behind your back as an international student. But you did go to a target school, which helps, I'm sure. But I'm sure it's also the flip side of that is super competitive there, right? So a lot of students at Columbia that want to go into investment banking, um, and are very, quite frankly, well prepared, right? Um, how was your GPA in school like when you were going through recruiting? Did you have a pretty good GPA? Was it so-so GPA? What would you kind of say you stacked up against everyone else?
Yeah, so I wasn't like I didn't have the most exceptional GPA. It was pretty average, not that great by like IB standards. So
Yeah.
that was definitely another sort of arm tied behind my back going into the process. But one thing that I quickly learned, and like especially after joining your program, was that um, just because that's the case, you just have to compensate in other ways, and that's sort of something that I really made up for in terms of networking and really highlighting other experiences on my resume, like my extracurriculars, so like any finance clubs I'm in, stock pitch competitions that I've done. So just sort of being on top of that and highlighting that, you know, you might have an average GPA, but that doesn't mean that you're not a sort of stellar candidate and you're not as committed to um, the grind per se.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay. So you had all these obstacles that you kind of had to kind of overcome. Sounds like the odds are kind of stacked against you in multiple different ways. Um, you needed help on the behavioral interview side of things, like you said. You were struggling with the networking. Um, you did ask your older friends for advice, but it wasn't super clear. On the technical side, how were your technicals prior to coming into Wall Street Mastermind?
Yeah, so that's also another aspect that really came through after I joined the program. Just the fact that with regards to what I thought was required in technical interviews, like it was nowhere near what I thought it was. In the sense that I had like a lot of the basics down, like the three statements and sort of basic finance interview questions, but I hadn't really done much work in on the more advanced topics. So that's like accretive or dilutive M&A or LBOs. And a lot of the times that because of how prepared a lot of candidates are, it's those sort of questions that separate you from another candidate. So it's just as important to nail those advanced concepts as it is to um, nail the more basic concepts too. And that's another thing I sort of learned.
Got it. Okay. Um, and so prior to Wall Street Mastermind, obviously you had done some work on your own, but like, what were some of the resources that you were using to navigate through this process? Like, were you just like looking stuff up on Google or YouTube, or like, did you have a certain course or a guide that you used, or what were you doing? Because I'm sure like all the kids at Columbia, you guys probably have a ton of resources available, right? So like, what were you personally doing?
Yeah. Well, like a lot of unprepared freshmen and sophomores, I think I spent way too much time on Wall Street Oasis, more than I really should have, and that's sort of a mistake that I like. If I like went through the process again, that's something I would definitely change. Just um, not spending so much time on like online forums and listening to random strangers, like taking random strangers' advice because you really don't know whether like the legitimacy of what they like they say a lot of the times, and it's easy to get sucked down that rabbit hole too. Like you spend countless hours on it, and it isn't the most productive thing to do. But
Yeah,
that's one thing I did. I spent a lot of time on Wall Street Oasis, um, read the Vault guide, and went and like a lot of the other standard guides. So I also looked at the Wall Street Oasis guide,
yeah,
um, and then yeah, and a lot of it was just also sort of cursory Google searches, and then like finding various questions online and looking up past interview questions, and then using that to study. But it was really time consuming. Wasn't as productive as it should have been, and like balancing that with school is also tough because um, especially like because I'm doing engineering, like a lot of my classes took up quite a lot of my time.
yeah,
So it was sort of it was really difficult sort of balancing that with getting on top of recruiting as well. And that's another sort of place that Wall Street Mastermind came in because it sort of condensed everything you needed to know into like, you know, compact modules, and it makes it a lot more accessible. saves you a lot of time as well, and that's one thing I really appreciated as well.
Got it. Okay. So I mean, regarding what you said about Wall Street Oasis, I mean, I think Wall Street Oasis, it's not all bad, right? Like it sometimes once in a while you go in there and you'll find some super
Oh
helpful.
yeah, definitely.
There's hidden golden nuggets in there, but I like to say like the golden nuggets are hidden underneath like a giant pile of just crap, right? Like that you have to sift through. And by the time you find it, you have crap like all over your face, and you don't really know like, is this actually like a gold nugget or is this just crap, right?
Yeah.
To your point, you don't really know who's giving you the advice. It very much could be like, it very well could be like some other kid who's no more qualified than you are, but just
Yeah.
acting like a know-it-all and then like steering you down a certain direction, right? Because like if I were to ask you in hindsight, now that you have a job, right, and knowing what you know today, if you were to think back on like, I don't know, something you read on Wall Street Oasis that was completely false, like, could you think of something like that? Because I could probably think of one like right off the top of my head. Um, I bet you someone has probably told you that if you have a 3.2 GPA, then you can pretty much kiss investment banking goodbye. Right? That's probably something that you hear on Wall Street Oasis all the time. Right?
Yeah.
And in reality, like we have so many clients that have GPAs between 3.0 and 3.5 that have gotten into investment banking. Right? Not even necessarily from the top schools, but just like you said, because they know how to compensate for it in other areas, right? And I don't think that when people say this kind of thing, I don't think they're necessarily being malicious or they're trying to like mislead you on purpose. It's really just that that's their worldview because they don't have any point of references where they personally know someone who has that type of GPA who has gotten into banking. So to them, they're like, oh, it's impossible. No one's ever done it before. Right? But at the same time, like they haven't seen that many people that have actually applied for these jobs, and more importantly, they haven't seen that many people that have applied to these jobs the right way, right? So it's like you can't base you can't base like your you can't like take their opinion and just like turn that into something that's factual or whatever, right? Because if you look at it from our worldview, we see so many clients that have gotten jobs with GPAs in that range. And so we have a totally different belief, which is, hey, yeah, like the higher your GPA, the better your chances are going to be, no doubt about it. But the bar is not set at like 3.7 or above, which is probably what people would tell you on Wall Street Oasis, right? So I always like to tell people that because I feel like so many students get discouraged when they go on Wall Street Oasis and they spend all their time in there, and there's all these people telling you you can't do this, you can't do that, or like if you end up anywhere except for Goldman Sachs, then you're trash, whatever, right? And it's like none of that stuff is true, right? And like I think the worst part is like it prevents a lot of people from either even trying to go after their dreams, or it prevents or maybe people still try, but like they're trying with this huge self-limiting belief in their head, which then like hinders them from actually performing to their highest potential because like even when they get that interview or when they go into that networking conversation, they're walking in there feeling like they're lesser than maybe the other kid who has a 4.0 GPA, when in reality that shouldn't be everything that you base your self-worth on.
Right, right, exactly.
So I think, to your point, um, I always encourage people to not spend too much time on Wall Street Oasis. We have our clients use it for very specific things, right? Like sometimes it's good when you're trying to like crowdsource stuff, right? Like, hey, has anyone taken the hire review for Morgan Stanley? And sometimes people will post the questions on Wall Street Oasis, and I think that's awesome, right? But like, I wouldn't go on Wall Street Oasis for people's like opinions and things that are subjective and not really factual. I don't
Right.
really find that as helpful for that kind of stuff. I don't know if you agree.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And like another example of something that like occurred to me when like I was like going through Wall Street Oasis like freshman sophomore year was just that at one point I thought that Columbia wasn't even a target school, which like in hindsight is pretty ridiculous. But like that's the sort of things you end up seeing there. Like, oh, if you don't go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, like there's no way you're breaking into like any any sort of bank. And um yeah, I think ultimately just like you're right, like it is a useful resource in terms of sort of gauging the applicant pool and like talking to other people about the application process, for example, especially like in these times with like COVID right now. Like I think one thing a lot of like my friends at least have found useful is just like seeing which internships have got canceled, which banks are sort of giving out jobs at the moment. So I think in terms of that, like it's definitely a great resource and a great forum. But you're right, like in terms of gauging opinions and stuff, a lot of times like you do need to take things with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Like taking the people that are going to build you up and be a positive influence and block out the people that keep telling you like you can't do this, you can't do that or whatever, right? Because that's not really going to serve you, right? But okay, so you use a bunch of like whatever, Google, Wall Street Oasis, Vault Guide, Wall Street Oasis Guide. You kind of did it all, right? You talked to upperclassmen. Um, Still wasn't really having the type of success that you wanted to have, it sounds like. Then I think you came to Wall Street Mastermind, right? Um, what do we actually work with you on? Or like, what do you feel like changed for you after you came into the program? So I know you kind of touched on a little bit. You said one thing was it made it a lot more efficient for you and it saved you a lot of time because we take all the information that's out there and we kind of organize it all in one place. And actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Like, why don't you talk about it? Like, what was most helpful to you?
Yeah, sure. And like you sort of alluded to it, but like it's that structure. And I think having that structure is so important in like the recruiting process because it moves pretty quickly. Like you know, apps open up rapidly and like you like interviews come out immediately. And if you're sort of all over the place and you don't have like a clear structure or like organized plan on how you're going to tackle it, like it's you're making your life pretty difficult, and recruiting would be a lot harder than it needs to be. So I think that's one way Wall Street Mastermind really helped me out, just giving the recruiting process like a lot of structure and having some sort of organization and plan going into it, and adhering to that. Like it's a because like you said, it's efficient first of all, but it also makes you feel a lot more prepared. And a lot of the times like going into interviews, it's all about your mental state going in. Like if you feel a lot more organized and prepared, like you're bound to do a lot better than you would if you weren't organized or didn't feel prepared. Like if you'd been cramming using guides like the night before an interview, um you're not like it's not likely that you would do as well as someone who went into it like with preparation and had actually got a clear schedule and was ahead of the curve. So I think that's sort of where it really came in handy.
Got it. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, if I play devil's advocate for a second, there's a lot of people out there that say, "Oh well, like all the information you need is already out there, right? All the information you need is you can find it on Google. You can Google anything nowadays. So like, why is this of any value? Like, are we actually teaching you anything that you can't just find on your own? I mean, what would you say to that?
I mean, like the issue I have with that argument is just the fact that like there's also a lot of misinformation out there, and especially when like now like especially when you're a sophomore, and especially if you don't sort of have connections or like friends slash family in the banking industry already, like it's hard to know to sort of filter through all the junk and like figure out what's right, what's wrong, and what the best approach is. And I mean like hypothetically you're right, like you could just use Google, but it would take you so much time and would also just be such a strain on your life in general. You'd end up spending like a lot more time than you really need to, and that can like affect you in like a lot of other ways. Like a common sort of complaint that I've heard before from like friends of mine that are like going through recruiting right now is just that like, oh, like how do you balance school and like work, or like if you have an internship at the time with like recruiting? Like I don't think you can do that. Like, bro, I might just like flunk this midterm for my interview, but like I don't like that's not necessary. Just because if you have a clear structure and everything's organized and you know exactly what's right from wrong, and you know what to focus on and like where to focus on as well, um like recruiting doesn't need to come at the expense of something else, and it's something that's very doable as long as you have that right plan. And that's something that Wall Street Mastermind gave me.
Got it. So basically, if you think about what you guys are being asked to do as a candidate nowadays, I mean, by the way, I recruited, you know, more than 10 years ago, and I thought it was competitive back then. But things only continue to get harder and harder over time, as is the case with anything, not just investment banking, right?
Right, right.
Um, but you guys are essentially being asked to be great students, have good grades in school, be really active in a bunch of clubs and extracurricular activities, do multiple internships. Ideally, they're relevant internships, within finance and things like that. Not even enough to just do it over the summer anymore, but sometimes during the school year, right? You're probably being asked to network with, upwards of hundreds of bankers, which is what a lot of my clients are doing. You got to learn all the technical questions. You got to prepare all the behavioral answers. And so there's just all these things on your plate, and you still only have 24 hours in a day, right? Other people that are not trying to recruit for investment banking, they're maybe just worried about maintaining their grades, and then that's it. And they have the exact same amount of time as you. And so, how are you supposed to not drop the ball on any of this stuff? Or maybe you do drop the ball on one of these things, but that could be the thing that prevents you from getting in, right? Like if your grades suffer, like you flunked that midterm, like you said, because you want to focus on recruiting, and now your GPA is too low. Well, guess what? They won't hire you if your GPA is too low, right? So it's like at the end of the day, you're making trade-offs no matter what. Like whatever you choose to do or however you choose to do it, there's an opportunity cost of, hey, time is money, right? Like we only have a limited amount of time. Once that time passes, it doesn't replenish itself, right?
Yeah.
And so, okay, so basically, like we take everything you have to do. I think the biggest takeaway I'm hearing from you is, hey, because you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, step by step, and you have a very structured process, or almost like a proven system or like a playbook that we have all of our clients go through, and it's been battle tested, and we know it works. We have a phenomenal success rate, right? Like 93% as of today. So you know that, hey, as long as I execute and I follow the game plan, I'm going to be fine. Like I don't have to do all this trial and error and go online, find some information, try it out, see if it works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, I realize like, oh, I got bad information. Now let me go find more information and try that instead. That's what takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
like having to network with bankers and not really knowing like how to have those conversations, which is probably how you were feeling before the program. But you just end up going through the motion and you have all these conversations, nothing's coming out of it. That's a huge time suck as well, right?
Right, exactly. And the thing is, like, the process has changed as well. Like, recruiting is starting as early as like the spring semester, sophomore year too. So, like, I feel like prior to that, like, a lot of people would rely on the summer, having more free time to sort of get up to speed with on like technicals and prepping for interviews, using that extra time after your like internship during the summer, or like that sort of period, like after your internship ends and like before school starts, to sort of like really nail down stuff. But like that's not the case anymore. Like banks are recruiting a lot earlier now, and that sort of forced people to be a lot more on top of it like during the semester, and that's why it's so important to just have some sort of structure and be able to balance it with like other aspects of your life too. And that's sort of why that organization is so important.
Got it. Okay. So then you talked earlier about like how you feel going into the interview, like it's a mental state, right? Like you feel more organized and you feel more prepared, you're gonna feel better and you walk in there feeling more confident, right? Why did you feel like you were more prepared? I mean, both on really like if you think about an interview, there's like the technical portion and there's the behavioral portion, right? But like why did you feel more prepared going into the interview than you would have before Wall Street Mastermind? Like what was there like one or two things that would just like kind of change the game for you, or what was it?
A part of it was definitely the community, like seeing that this system has worked for other people, and like seeing other people sort of talk about how, you know, they just got an offer. Like after you hear that, you know that okay, it was a level playing field. Like I learned the same things, I went through the same system as that other guy in Wall Street Mastermind. And immediately, like within that community, you get a sense of like, you know, if they can do it, like I can too. And that sort of gives you a confidence because you know now that like the system definitely works. And you know, if it's working for other people, like you just have to keep pushing and make sure it works for you because you have all the tools and you have access to everything. Like it really is a level playing field at this point. So that's sort of what gave me the confidence, at least going into an interview, and just knowing that like, you know, I've done everything I could. I've sort of I've come in prepared as I can. I just need to do it at this point.
Got it. Yeah, so you're just talking about the effect of being in the right environment, I guess. Like to your point, you didn't really know a lot of international students around you who maybe have successfully gotten into banking, and so maybe your worldview prior to Wall Street Mastermind was like, hey, I don't know if I can do this or not. Versus after joining Wall Street Mastermind, you see all of our other clients around you who probably go to like schools that are way less of a target school than Columbia and maybe didn't have perfect GPAs either and whatever the flaws they had, but like they were all getting offers too. And that shifted like the belief that you had inside of you, which is like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so it's
Right.
like more being part of like a winning environment or playing on a winning team. When they say like you're like the average of the five people you spend the most time with or whatever, but like that's just another way of saying like environment really matters, right? It's like why parents a lot of times would go through great pains and great sacrifices to make sure that their kids are in the best school districts or going to the best colleges, even if it costs more money, because they want them to surround themselves with other good students so that it'll be easier for them to be a high performer as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. What about like your technical abilities? I know coming in you were feeling a little bit iffy about it. Um, like what would you say is like the biggest difference between how you learn technicals in Wall Street Mastermind versus like how you will learn it anywhere else?
Yeah. So I think a lot of these like guides and going through them by yourself is um definitely not like it you don't allocate as much time as you should to it, just because often like you go through something and you'll be like, oh, I know this, like I've done this before, I like, you know, I've built a DCF before, like I know it. But you don't really question yourself on whether you actually know it. You sort of just assume a base level, and you sort of just go forward with that because of, you know, your inherent biases. Like people often are a lot more confident than they should be. So that's sort of one aspect that Wall Street Mastermind really helped, because the questions that they like, technical questions are, it's not just like walk me through a DCF, like that's a very basic one, but often like it's a lot more intricate than that, and like ask you about a lot of like the nuances. And like that's like something I never really thought about before the program. Like obviously like I knew like a lot of the base level stuff about like a DCF or the three statements and stuff like that, but I never really like explored why, like explored the why behind a lot of these concepts, and that's sort of what's important. And um, figuring out like the why behind a lot of the things, like a lot of the inputs in it, like and the assumptions that go into a lot of these models is just as important as like knowing how to do them. And like that's something that I definitely learned through the program too.
So by exploring the why, you're just saying like, hey, maybe before, if I said, hey, like, walk me through a DCF, you could tell me the formulas and whatever, but like you didn't really understand conceptually why those formulas are the way they are, or how to explain, like if you had to teach this concept to a sixth grader who knows nothing about finance, you probably wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's yeah, that's sort of what I meant by the why, and just like not just high understanding it like at a high level, but just like understanding it to the core and just like getting everything about it. Because like often a lot of the questions, um and like often how they separate like candidates in interviews with like technical questions is just asking them in sort of weird ways. And
Right.
like the only ways to like answer those questions is if you like inherently understand it. And that's another sort of thing I learned as well.
Got it. So having a application knowledge where you're able to apply these concepts to different scenarios as opposed to just saying, hey, I memorized the specific answer to this question and I can only answer if you ask me this exact question that I already memorized.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's a different level of understanding, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. What about on the behavioral side? Like, what do you think it takes for someone to have more confidence on their behavioral answers? Because I actually find that the behaviorals are, a lot of people are more confident about their behaviorals because they feel like it's easier than the technicals because it's just talking about yourself, right? But at the same time, it's also like you're not completely sure if whatever answers you have are actually good answers. Right? Like you just don't know. So what do you think is actually necessary for you to feel like, yeah, I feel really good about these answers and just walk into that interview and, you know, feel like you're totally prepared? Like what does it take to do that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's two parts to it. So like one of them is definitely um crushing it when you're networking and like building a repertoire with like bankers and like whatever firm you're interviewing with, because firstly that gives you a lot of confidence and gives you like a lot of um sort of understanding of the firm's culture. And like the only way to really do that is through the network, like the networking part of the process. Like if you don't network enough and you don't know enough people at a firm, then you're not really, you won't really be able to gauge the firm's culture and like understand whether you're a good fit for that firm. And that's like another thing I never really considered, the whole concept of like whether you're a fit for the firm. I thought it was like some sort of nebulous bullshit that like firms throw out during like firm wides, but like that's not true at all. And like that's like one of the biggest mistakes I made,
Yeah,
like not realizing that like fit is really important. And like why the behaviorals play such a huge role, because that's essentially the purpose of them, to gain whether like to gauge whether you are a good fit for the firm. And like I said, so like that's the first part of it, just like establishing that repertoire with a lot of bankers at the firm, and making sure you understand the firm's culture and understand what it would feel like to actually work there. And then I guess the second part of it is just approaching it systematically, like having answers to a lot of these questions and really like self-reflecting, and making sure you know yourself. Because I feel like and like this is like another common mistake with a lot of applicants like going into the process, is like there's a specific type of person that like a lot of banks and firms are looking for, but like that's not true at all. Like I mean, sorry, that is true to some extent in the sense that they're looking for someone who's competent, driven, hardworking, and like actually wants the job, but
right.
they're not looking for like a frat star or like an athlete or something. Like that's not true. people like from all over the spectrum, people from all like walks of life that end up in banking. And like that's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's the fact that like if you stay true to yourself and really self-reflect and um know how like know how you would like deal with different scenarios, like that's when you would be most successful in like a behavioral interview, if you're just honest with yourself. And like that's another thing that like the program really helped me do. Like Wall Street Mastermind helped me sort of self-reflect, because it's hard to sort of self-reflect and like answer questions like what are your biggest weaknesses and stuff like that, because again like like everyone has their own biases, and unless you like talk it out with someone and like really dig deep and have someone sort of probe you in on them, like it's tough to sort of figure it out, because most people aren't as self-aware as like they should be.
In other words, whatever you think, whatever answers you come up with on your own, you're usually going to think it's a pretty good answer because you're the one that came up with it. But in reality, there might be something that's not that great about the answer. You just won't be able to figure that out on your own. And so you need feedback from other people to help you see where you can improve. But not even just anyone, but ideally, you're getting the feedback from someone who's really experienced and has actually interviewed a lot of different candidates so that they can not just give you their highly subjective opinion, but they're actually basing their feedback to you on a very large sample size of data that they can compare your answers against, right?
Right, exactly.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense, man. Um, so what ultimately ended up happening? Like, what was the outcome of your recruiting process? Like, obviously, we alluded to this earlier. We had a happy outcome, but like, can you talk to people a little bit about what ended up happening? Like, how long did the process last for you? You know, what kind of offers did you end up with? Just give people a little bit of a sense.
Yeah, sure. So ultimately it all worked out. So I joined the program in Aprilish, and then sort of went through the program, went through all the modules, and then started getting interviews throughout the summer and like throughout the sort of beginning of fall junior year. And largely like every like pretty much like every interview that I sort of went into with like the approach that I'd learned was successful, in the sense that as long as I sort of built a repertoire with like the bankers at the firm and really focused in on it, like it was largely successful. So yeah.
Got it. Okay. And how many offers did you end up getting ultimately?
Ended up getting 3 offers. So I applied, like obviously you apply to a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work out for like a various number of reasons, and like that's beyond your control, but all that it takes is just having like that one offer and getting your foot through the door, which was like my initial goal.
Yeah.
So yeah, thankfully I ended up with 3 offers, which is really nice. And yeah.
Yeah. Because then you had choices actually versus a lot of people just kind of take whatever offer they can get, right? They're just happy to be here. Um, can you describe at like a high level? You can disclose who they are if you want, or if you're not comfortable, just at a high level, like what types of banks were these? Like what types of offers were you getting?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the work that I'd done prior to sort of recruiting was um oriented in sort of healthcare. So I knew I sort of wanted to, go to a bank that focused, or like didn't focus on healthcare, but like specialized in healthcare, where like that was their sort of main group. Or like if I applied to a bigger bank, like I wanted to make sure that, I really got along with like the healthcare group within that bank. So thankfully, like I ended up getting offers from banks that specialize in healthcare, and like banks that are up there in the league tables for healthcare. And yeah, that's why I was sort of really happy with the outcome.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like you're going to a bank that's you were more targeted, but you were focused on a specific niche. And you just wanted to make sure that whatever bank you ended up at is really, really good in that area, and you were able to land at a bank that basically is really good at healthcare, which is exactly what you wanted.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay. Got it. That's awesome, man. Um, any last? We only have a couple minutes left here, so any last minute advice for people who are like maybe people who are in your shoes, you know, maybe they're younger than you, but they're in where you, they're in or not in your shoes. They're where you were previously, right? Maybe they go to target school, but maybe their GPA is below average for banking. Maybe they are an international student, so they feel like the bar is even higher. What's something that you wish someone had told you back when you first started this process? Like, what would you want to tell these people?
Yeah. I guess I think the biggest thing to focus on, like going, like if that I could like wish I did again, and like my sort of main advice would be just to um really make sure you have structure, and like that's sort of been the theme like throughout like all the conversations we've had. But I think a lot of people underestimate how important it is just to take approach this with like a systematic in like a systematic approach, and like actually approach this with some sort of organization, and not just like read one guide and like switch to another if you don't like that, and then like focus on like DCFs, but like you don't really need to care about LBOs. Like, but if you like have a systematic approach and get through everything, and really focus on nailing like every part of the interview process. So a lot of people think that technicals are the end all when it comes to interviews, but um like like we said, like networking is just as important, and like behaviorals are also just as important, and focusing on like every aspect um the same amount, and making sure like you don't sort of slack off with regards to more like soft skills is so important. And with regards to like just getting your foot into the door, and like maintaining confidence, like especially if you're like an international student or you don't go to a target school or something, like I think it's just important to make sure you have the right community around you. And like that's another thing we talked about, just like being in a winner's circle like instantly helps your mental state and helps you feel more prepared, just because if you're in the right community, and you're in a community that's a lot more supportive and helpful, then you automatically, it sort of lifts your spirits and helps you feel more motivated as well, because keeping your motivation up during the process is also super important. Like it does get pretty long, and it does get pretty arduous, just balancing it with everything else in your life too. So I think just staying motivated is also just really important.
Got it. Okay. It's a lot of great advice, man. Appreciate you for doing that. So look, guys, I think the moral of the story, or my main takeaways from this conversation, is just that one, don't don't listen to a lot of the negative voices out there that might be telling you, whether it's on online and forums, whatever, that might be telling you that because you have X, Y, or Z flaws, then you can't, get into investment banking, right? Like most of the time, that's not true, right? What you really need to do instead is figure out a systematic way, a systematic approach to tackle all the challenges you have in front of you, and will help you basically compensate for maybe some of the shortcomings that you have, because nobody's perfect. Everybody's got some weaknesses, right? But if you can make up for that in other areas by being, outstanding or better than your competition, maybe on the technical side or on your work experiences or on your networking and things like that, um, you could totally get into investment banking. In fact, Shawn got more than one offer. He got three offers, right? Which means it wasn't a fluke, right? So I think, look, if you guys are kind of feeling like the same way that Shawn used to be feeling, if you guys are maybe in a similar position that he was in, and you're looking for that more systematic approach, and you're looking for that supportive community where everybody's winning together, and you want to be a part of that, and maybe you don't have a lot of resources around you, that's what we're here for, right? So if you want to see if this is the right thing for you, what I would encourage you guys to do is to book a free strategy session with our team. You can do so by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST. Okay, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do is we'll hop on the phone with you. We're gonna spend probably an hour with you, just learning more about your situation, what your goals are, what challenges are you having, and then we're going to give you our very honest assessment on, whether we think we can help you, or even if not, we're still going to give you advice on what we think we would do if we were in your shoes, right? So we're going to try to steer you in the right direction, and just help you get one step closer to your goal, right? And so that's an offer that, I just want to make to you guys. And, we look forward to speaking to you guys soon. So, Shawn, I want to thank you a lot for taking the time to hop on today and talk to everyone about your experiences. I know a lot of people are going to find this conversation super beneficial for them, and just even just like inspire them and give them hope that this can be done despite the odds, right? And obviously, I want to congratulate you on all the success and getting multiple offers. And I look forward to seeing, what you're able to do this summer at your internship, and obviously eventually what you end up doing full time. And so just thank you again for coming on here today. And obviously, don't be a stranger, and let's stay in touch, and let me know if I can ever help you with anything else.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Sam. Thanks for giving me the platform today just to talk about all this and talk about the process. And thank you for helping me throughout the process too. I couldn't have done it without the program, and that's sort of what I emphasize throughout the thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was an honor, and really enjoyed working with you. And like I said, again, looking forward to what you accomplish in the future. All right.
Thanks,
Cool.
Sam.
Well, guys, that'll be it for today. And, we'll be back soon with more of these in the near future. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.